Hey guys, my name is Matimio, and today I want to take a look at the new Destiny DLC, The Taken King. When Destiny first released about a year ago, for a lot of gamers out there, it was a pretty big disappointment. Bungie was hyping this up to be the next big epic first-person shooter, and while it had an absurd amount of potential, for a lot of people, it just fell short. I'm happy to say that while it still has its issues, The Taken King is not perfect, and we'll get to that here in a second. For the most part, this is a much better game. Bungie clearly heard the concerns of the community, and they have made a load of necessary changes that have just made this an overall much better experience. And so the first thing that I have to mention is that there is finally a story here. This would not be noteworthy in any other video game, but because, of course, in the original Destiny, there wasn't a story, we later learned that they stripped everything like a couple of months before the game released. I'm happy to say that while it's not groundbreaking, like it's not gonna completely change the way you think about video games, there is finally a story here that's really entertaining. The one that steals the show, though, and what makes this DLC at least enjoyable for me, has to go to Nathan Fillion's performance as Cade. He is with you the entire time. Basically every mission, he's talking to you, there's great banter between him and all of the other people in the tower, and it's just a good time. He's funny. I would say the best way to describe it is that he has reprised his role as Malcolm Reynolds from Firefly. He's charismatic, he's funny, there's awesome banter going on, he's basically a badass, and I loved his performance here. And so while once again, the story is not gonna knock your socks off, like it's not revolutionary whatsoever, it's very simplistic, from the performances of Nathan Fillion and Nolan North and everyone else that was involved, the story is just fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously. I was laughing throughout, I was just having a good time, and at the end of the day, I would say that is a hallmark of just a good story and really just a good video game, and so I have to give them props for that. One thing I have to critique them on, though, is that I was hoping for a wider array of new and interesting enemies to fight. There are a couple of exceptions. There are some brand new ones that we've never seen before, but for the most part, it's just a reskin of all of the other enemies that we fought in since the very beginning with a few new attacks. The entire premise of The Taken King is that the main bad guy has the ability to possess everything. He doesn't seem to ever possess other guardians, but he's able to possess every other faction. And so as soon as he possesses the Cabal or the Fallen, he gives them different abilities. And so when you do fight them, they look a little bit different. They still have the same skin. This is why I said it's a reskin, but they do have different ways that they're going to try to take you out. And so while it's not the biggest complaint, because let's be honest, there was already an absurd amount of variety in the base game, I was hoping that there was just going to add more to it. I love more variety. Who doesn't want more variety? And just to see it be a reskin felt like a cop-out. I felt like they could have done more with it, and so that has been a disappointment with this DLC. One thing I've loved, though, is that boss battles are finally a little bit more interesting. This was one of my biggest complaints when Destiny first released, because every boss at the end of a strike was essentially a bullet sponge. They'd alternate between one or two attacks, waves of enemies would come on in, and at the end of the day, it was boring. Slowly taking out a boss that only has one or two attacks and doesn't mix it up gets old fast. And while there are still some bullet spongy moments here, I'm happy to say that for the most part, every single strike that I've done so far, I've done 3, every single boss has been interesting, they're varied, and they feel a lot more dynamic. There's one boss battle where you have the option to take out the enemy's weaponry. There's a cannon on top of this robot, and if you shoot it off, he's no longer going to have that for the rest of the boss battle. Yeah, you may not be able to take him out as quickly, you're not going for the weak spot, but at least you're not having to deal with that threat anymore. Another great quality is that the arena that you're fighting in changes. There's one where the middle of the room opens up. You no longer can stand in the middle of the room. Pillars go up and down. There's one where it's basically you're in complete darkness and he's hunting you. It's really cool. Like the boss battles now have some flavor there, and while yes, they are still bullet spongy to some extent, the fact that they now varied and they have different mechanics and it's not just the same thing over and over again, at least in my eyes, that is a huge step in the right direction. A thing that I am a little concerned about, though, is how much endgame content is actually here. I feel like I've pretty much beaten the entire DLC. I went through all of the missions, unless I'm just missing something. I've got one more strike, and while there is the raid, which I am excited about, the raid from what Bungie has described is gonna be awesome. They say that there's gonna be a twist, it's gonna be one of the best raiding experiences ever. Once you beat that, there's basically just the harder versions of all of it. And so what I'm crossing my fingers on is that these harder versions are actually going to have different and new mechanics that mix it up and make things more, not only more challenging, but more interesting. Some of my viewers were saying that this is going to be the case, and this is something that they have slowly adopted in the previous DLCs. And while it's good to have stronger and beefier enemies with more health, at the end of the day, if that's all that they've changed, that's going to be a huge disappointment. And so if they are able to make things more interesting with the hardcore versions, I'm not really going to have any complaints with the endgame. Like, that's going to give you a lot of content, especially if you're going to be leveling up all 3 classes and all the 3 subclasses in those classes. There is just insane amount of content to experience here. And so as long as the repetitiveness has been kind of solved with more interesting mechanics for those harder versions, I think the endgame is going to be quite interesting. The elephant in the room, though, the one big thing that I know a lot of people have been turned off by is that $40 price tag. A lot of people have felt burned, clearly burned with Destiny, especially with the release, and to spend another $40 on a game that was already promising the world and now actually kind of delivering on it is hard to swallow. Do I think that this is worth it for everyone that loves Destiny? Absolutely. If you already love this game, it basically improves upon everything. There's more armor, there's more weapons, there's the gear grind, the story is there, the bosses are more interesting. Like, the game in general is a hell of a lot better. For everyone else, though, that left because they were unsatisfied with the gear grind and they were unsatisfied with grinding the same strikes over and over and over again, it's gonna be a little bit harder to say if this is worth the $40 purchase. For me personally, it has been worth it, but that's just simply because I've always wanted a Diablo-esque first-person shooter. I love Diablo. I love the idea of getting gear, shiny new gear, to do harder challenges just to get more gear, to progress onto the new challenge to get even more gear. Like, I love that. I've always enjoyed that about Diablo, and to have that in a first-person shooter has always been something that I've wanted. But you have to know that that is what Destiny is at its core. It's a gear grind. It's about doing the same strikes over and over and over again. And while there are going to be harder versions, and I'm really hoping that they're going to mix up the mechanics in those harder versions, that is what it is at the end of the day. It's all about getting gear. It's all about progressing your character. And if that is not something that you're interested in, then the Taken King doesn't do a whole lot to give you more bang for your buck. But overall, if you can't tell, I have had a lot of fun with the Taken King. Yes, it's not perfect, it is definitely not flawless, but the improvements they've made, I think, has been amazing. It's been a huge step in the right direction, and for the most part, I have been very satisfied with this DLC. But I'd like to know what you guys think about the Taken King. Do you agree with me on the positives? Do you like the improvements? Do you completely disagree with me and you've just been really unsatisfied with this content overall? Let me know down below. But yeah, guys, that is about it for this little first impressions of the new Destiny DLC. I hope you enjoyed. But until tomorrow, have a good one and take it easy.